Hey you, yeah you, do you wanna get jacked out of your mind? Get all the babes when going at the beach? Well, I got the video for you. Today we're gonna talk about some of the best ways to become insanely powerful very early in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We're gonna talk about best gear early, best materia, and some of the best abilities that will absolutely wreck your enemies. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Let's get started with some of the best synergy abilities and skills, including the Fireworks Blade. Even though you get this super early, it's a very solid damage option, but it also further increases the level of your limit break. So for somebody like Cloud, this is very good. He does have a pretty solid limit break. You can get a higher level version of it during that combat, deal higher damage, and he's mostly going to have a very easy time building it up anyway, as you constantly stagger and pressure enemies, plus you're pretty good at tanking anyway via the reflect and counterattack mechanics. Another very solid option is one with Tifa. This one is going to extend your stagger time and attack power if you perform it against enemies that have already been stunned. So a very good option against bosses to keep them there for longer, but also gain a damage increase for that duration. However, nothing compares to the synergy skill called Melee Blade. This is going to imbue your weapon with different effects, but this consistently remained one of the highest damage dealers all the way into the end game. There are technically two versions of it, including Power Cleave and the Spell Blade. However, the Spell Blade I found to be the much better option. So in this case, if you combine this with either Aerith or with Yuffie, you're gonna get your blade imbued with some spell damage, which in turn is going to unleash a very powerful attack that also affects enemies a little bit further away, as you leave off a line of very high damage. So consistently, this would one-shot entire groups of enemies when lining things up properly, and on the plus side, it also completely demolishes bosses, especially when you get to stun them. This will completely wreck them. Now, technically, there's also a ranged option that's pretty good. It's called Ranged Blade between Cloud and Barret, and essentially it allows Cloud to reflect bullets at enemies, staggering and also pressuring them. It's actually a pretty good option as you kinda lack ranged abilities besides Materia. There's technically one more ability for Cloud I really enjoyed, and that's the Wind Current. There are versions for other elements too, but this one in particular pulls enemies towards you, plus many of the enemies early on, especially like the birds of prey, are weak to the wind elemental. So you don't really want a wind materia on you to waste a slot. This instead provides you that ability, plus you can easily chain it into your attacks, so you can easily apply pressure and immediately start staggering those foes without actually having to waste a materia slot. Anyway, we got a few more rapid fire options for some of the other characters. So if you have Barret in your party, definitely get the Iron Defense. This is pretty much going to give you immunity to a lot of the damage sources, especially if an enemy is about to throw a big attack. Definitely use this and just protect the entire party against them. Another one is the Arcane Blast. You can combine this between him and Aerith and also get a temporary unlimited MP, especially useful if you build one of them as a pure on mage. Another one would be this right here. Well, two of them, it's the Physical Safeguard, which applies the Protect status effect upon you at the start of the combat. And another one is Regeneration, which does the same but applies a regen status effect on Barret at the start of the fight. Very good if you want to soak in damage and make him the designated tank. Aerith also has a few. You can build her however you want, but Bodyguard can be useful to just get some of your party mates between you and your enemy, especially useful since she's still slow despite having the teleport option. You kinda tend to get close gapped all the time. And finally, for Tifa, definitely go for the Leaping Strikes. This is going to give her the ability to actually jump mid-air, as pretty much any partner can launch her up in the air in almost any direction. So very solid option since she kinda lacks that on her own, with the exception of some of the later on abilities once you unlock them. But this is the most consistent option you can get that does pretty much that. Now, you probably saw me using this insane electrical damage against enemies pretty much back to back. Well, that one is called Plasma Discharge, and it's one of the many abilities that you get from a brand new type of item called the Enemy Skill Materia. So what this does is that every time I build an ATB charge, I get to unleash one of these plasma energy damage around me, which in turn is also going to further feed into the ATB gauge, further filling it up even faster with the build that I have. So I constantly pull these off every single time, especially the more enemies there are, the more of this I will pull off, and there's even like heals that I can get with the build. Again, let me know down below if you want to see it. But in the meantime, as I've said, you get this ability as well as many others from the enemy skill materia. This is completely different than any other materia in the game, as it has its own progression and it further unlocks many other even better abilities along the line and also provides some extra stats. So to get this, you need to complete biological intel, starting with the Know Thine Enemy very early on in the grasslands. This already gives you the 1-star enemy skill materia, but all the remaining biological intel from this point on will further increase the star rating on that, plus provide extra abilities every time. So by default, this comes with the Sonic Boom ability, which is pretty great as it gives you both bravery and faith, so further buffing up your attack and magic power for a limited time. However, if you complete the second biological intel called Blinded by Light, this is the one that gives you that plasma discharge. So for this, you're gonna need to complete some requirements, including to defeat the classified foe in the grasslands and also assess 16 of the 16 enemies in the grasslands. So the classified intel is going to be Quetzalcoatl, which you find right here on this side of the map in the grasslands. Pretty much every map has one specific big boss that you can fight, but this one is going to be particularly difficult. And another one for the assessment, you're gonna have to, again, as I've said in my beginner's guide, to assess every enemy that you find in your path. That's why I always suggest doing that first. But if you already unlocked some of the fights in the combat sim, you can of course also assess them over there and it will still count nonetheless. Once you're done, congratulations, you got one of the best abilities early on, and if you also use one of the materials that gives you an ATB gauge at the start of the fight, you can immediately activate that and already have it available for the entire duration. Heck, there are even some later on blades that you can use, and some of the abilities over there couple very well with this, but again, if you want to see a guide on that, I'm gonna drop it really soon. Now, other materials can be acquired from other combat simulator missions. However, the one I recommend next is the Junon Battle Conqueror of the Skies, especially since the requirements are rather quick. So this includes defeat Fonadu and Stormwing in the Junon region. So the first one, Fonadu, you can find very close to the Chocobo Ranch at the start of that section. So very easy, and it's annoying, but you're gonna have enough damage by this point. Meanwhile, the second one is a bit further east, so you will have to kind of circle around down south and then come back to the other side, but this is going to let you find that other fight. And once you defeat all of these in the combat sim 2, this is then going to give you that elemental materia. This is actually a very solid option to combine with some of the other fire or ice elemental materials. Personally, I recommend combining it with some of the new combo materials like fire and ice or electricity and wind, since this is going to give you both of those effects in case you fight against enemies with multiple weaknesses and resistances. This can actually be a very solid option to cover all bases. Oh, and by the way, you can find a bunch of fire and ice materia early anyway, including from Chadley, who sells one in exchange for intel points. So again, like I said before, complete intel data around grasslands and you're going to be able to afford that. Anyway, let's move over to gear. And even though there are some free options early on in terms of like accessories and armor, none of them will have enough materia slots for you, with one exception, which is going to be the gold coral armlet. This is going to be the best option for that up until like chapter 5, 6 or 7. Can't really remember, but basically by the time you hit Junon, which is really early, you can have one of the best options until much later. So this is something that you don't get from chests, but actually from item transmutation, which means you're gonna have to unlock a chip/recipe for it, which you do via some of these excavation sites you will find in each map. This one specifically will be in Junon. So lots of these excavation sites get revealed from live springs when you activate them, but specifically for this one, you just need to head over right here on this side of the map, which is just south of that Chocobo Ranch, and also from some of the previous fights I was talking about. And once you reach here, you're gonna have to use the Chocobo, and I believe on the second one you're going to get, yeah, this one right here, the enhanced version of that gold armlet. So now you can both craft that basic version of it, but also have the enhanced one to gain slightly better defenses against magic and attacks. Two of its slots, by the way, are also linked, so you can definitely use some nice combos early on, maybe get some passive defenses, resistances, or maybe even use an AP up Materia and yeah, further level up other Materia much faster. But other better options don't come until like chapter 9 and then chapter 12, if I remember correctly. Of course, if you further level up your craftsmanship by building gear and also unlocking those excavation sites, you can also get some of the higher level accessories too, especially early on. The high power wrist guards, the vest MK2, and also the magical earrings were the ones that I went for right away, especially since you only need some iron ore to already enhance them. But for example, for the high power wrist guards, you also get like an HP by 250 besides some 5% increase to strength. Also for that armor MK2, very solid option for Barret, vitality 5% and HP 250, and the magical earring remained one of the best until the later stages for Puron mages, gives you some nice magic power and extra MP, and again, their basic variants don't take too much to build. The requirements for it is not too bad either, and you can usually buy some of these mats at some of the vendors, especially nearby Chocobo ranches. They usually get updated all the time as you progress in new regions, and yeah, they also get highlighted, especially if you already added that item to your to-do list. You will see all of its requirements being highlighted already in the vendor screen right there. By the way, quick tip, if you want to get some extra materials, especially the ones that drop from enemies, is to use steel before dropping them in combat. So for example, iron ore, which you can get from the ogres early on in the grasslands, you can first use steel on some of these enemies, get one iron ore, and then once you defeat them, they will drop another one once more. I believe you can actually go up to 3 times on the same enemies if you also use morph during that combat, as that's also going to have a chance to further provide you some extra resources. But moving on and keeping up with the character upgrades, another thing you should not neglect is the Mughal Emporium, as this gives you access to even more extra items, but especially so some of these skill manuals for all characters. So extra SP that you can spend in your folios and unlock even more strong abilities. But this comes, as I said, from the Mughal encounters. Pretty much every map has like one of them, in total of 7. So they are pretty annoying because you have to round up a bunch of these Mughals that will constantly try to sabotage you and play tricks on you. But again, there are some of these tornadoes that you can use, for example, to just keep them at bay and then transport them manually back to the center area. Otherwise, you will have to just chase them down and try to angle it right so that they do enter inside of that sort of enclosure. But every time you win one of these encounters, that Emporium level will further increase, providing access to, again, even more items and skill manuals. So definitely something that you should go for, but keep in mind that everything in it will cost Mughal medals. Luckily, you will find a ton of them, so constantly break chests, especially ones around some of these Ramna Wave towers, but even in like dungeons and other places, constantly try to do it because they are pretty much all over the place. Now, technically, there's one final type of item that you can get. Like I said before, there's some of this classified intel / classified fights that you get on every single map. Quetzalcoatl was one of them, but there are ones for every single map out there, and they all drop unique items that can be used for specific crafting recipes in that item transmuter. So one of them that I crafted was the Psychic Charm, which you get to use if you have the Mind Flayer crown by defeating the Mind Flayer. But this grants complete immunity to silence, a very good option if you, for example, fight Thornberries and the Thornberry King, and other enemies later on will actually start silencing you, so it's a very, very solid option to have. Meanwhile, the ring from Quetzalcoatl will give you some extra synergy skill and synergy damage if you have this equipped. You also have the Karmic Cowl, which was one of my favorite actually. This actually uses a Thornberry King's robe and it grants immunity to slow and to instant death, so you can more easily defeat these enemies in combat. And plus, there are many more in there. Like I said, for every single boss in every single area, you're gonna have a special item that drops from them, and you can go ahead and craft these very cheaply. Anyway, lots more following very soon on the channel for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. As I said before, if you want to stay tuned for that, definitely make sure you sub to the channel, leave a like on the video, and also activate that notification bell to get these videos early. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.